across the street, and I really study a lot of the automotive history. And you can start with the 90s, not the 1990s, but the 1890s. This book, published in 1961, has many, many cars you'll never see at Hershey or any other show. They're very rare, few survive. Some steam cars, some electric cars. When they tell you that Elon Musk is a genius, you know where he got his information from. And I was at the Simeone Museum in Philadelphia at the beginning of October. He has a very nice collection of cars, and his cliche is, when the second car was built, it raced the first car. So race cars are really nothing rare. People have been racing since the Olympics in Greece 2,000 years ago. They race with chariots, they race with horses, they race with boats, and they race with automobiles. Race cars on Long Island can go back to 1904 when we had the Vanderbilt Cup race on the Motor Parkway. And the Vanderbilt family sponsored that. Many ideas in automobiles are proven by racers. Just like durability tests of the chassis, the seats, and other components of the car, a race improves the breed. They're more like an experimental car, especially if the factory that makes it sponsors it. You have to have a driver. That's a skill. Once you get a good driver, you have the car campaign, test different components, re-engineer a suspension or part of the engine, and you see how that stands up to competition. And everybody, especially in the early days of the automobile, was trying to copy everybody else. And what do you do when somebody comes out with a new car? You go out and buy it, tear it down, find out what they did, and then you improve yours. And that's been industry ever since the wheel was invented in 5,000 BC or whatever. Now, in this club, it's centered around the Chevrolet Corvette. And the Chevrolet Corvette, everybody goes to the museum in Bowling Green, or they go to shows, or they get books, or you go watch something on Velocity. They all say it came out in 1953, the motor around in New York, blah, 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 and then they came out with the V8 in 1955, and then it came out with the fuel injection in 57. Everybody's heard that whole thing. It's in all of the books. But you have to say to yourself, did somebody wake up and say, let's build this car? And no. In fact, the evolution of the Corvette goes way back, and that's really what I'm talking about tonight. We're not going to address 1953 or even 1954 or anything like that. We're going to go back before that, from 1953 back, and try to find, and I will bring this out, who really developed laid the groundwork for the development of the Corvette. And the answer is a guy by the name of Frank McGurk. Now, Frank McGurk, he was born in 1915, died in 1982. I was just online trying to do a little quick research before I came here. I just got the idea. I got this book many, many years ago. And McGurk Engineering was in the Los Angeles area. And the only thing they have online is Frank McGurk did race it. He put a car in Indianapolis in 1936, and he didn't finish because of a broken crankshaft. But Frank McGurk, like many other race car drivers, Frank McGurk raced Chevrolet. Now, others raced Ford, especially the Flathead that came out in 1932, or Model Ts. You can go back to a lot of the cars like the Mercer, the Stutz Bearcat around World War I. A lot of those cars were very competent. They would go 100 miles an hour. And by 1910, 1912, you had a lot of cars. Now, the key is most automobile engines were under square. Now, under square means the bore of the cylinder divided by the stroke is less than 1. Under square means you're designing for torque. You're going to have a lot of low-end torque, And then once you get past 2,800 or 3,000 RPM, you're going to max out. And the other thing is most engines up until 1953 were 6-volt electrical system. Electrical systems for the spark plug, there's a component called inductance. Inductance is the push of the spark into the cylinder once it's compressed. The problem with a 6-volt electrical system is even with the coil stepping the voltage up, you don't have enough inductance beyond 4,000 RPM. After that, you fade out and you can't really attain higher engine speeds. So I'm going to show why the V8 was developed for 1955 and why the Chevrolet V8 is the #1 engine to purchase. Since 1955, according to my count, and we're not only talking about automobiles, we're talking about industrial applications, whether it's well pumps or compressors or other industrial applications where you need a power source to turn a shaft. The Chevrolet V8, since 1955, over 1 billion, with a B, were manufactured. That's the largest production engine, 265, 283, 327, 350, 400, 396, 402, 427, 454. Did I miss anything?
307.
Okay, sorry, that's a stroke 283. Okay. You got me, okay. But basically, all those engines combined since 1955 total over 1 billion made. And that's automotive, industrial, everything, okay?
That's great.
That's pretty impressive for an automotive product. I mean, if McDonald's sold 1 billion hamburgers, well, it's just you put it on a bun. To build an engine, that's a lot more work. To sell 1 billion, that's phenomenal. And the Chevrolet V8 is the #1 power plant. And the reason it is because when it was originally designed, and I'll tell you how that came about, in my opinion, the bore divided by the stroke is greater than 1, so it's called over square. An over square design is designed for RPM. Then you've got the 12-volt electrical system. Once you have a 12-volt electrical system, you're going to get inductance that's going to take it up to 7,000 RPM without any problem. And that's what Chevrolet did. Now, Frank McGurk, he started racing in 1934 when he was 18, 19 years old. Back then, Chevrolet had the 194 cubic inch 6-cylinder. The big breakthrough with Chevrolet was in 1937. They came out with the 216 engine. This is a piston from a 216 engine. All right, that's pretty greasy, but back then you didn't have emissions and they're dirty engines. But I've taken a few of them apart. 216 also has a Splash electrical lubrication system. Splash actually has a tray in the oil pan, and it has little troughs, and each connecting rod has a little scoop, and it comes down and grabs the oil and throws it up into the crank and then up into the rings. You're going to get oil pressure about 14 psi. Now in 1953, when the new 235 cubic inch engine came out, which was actually was started in 1950, but in 1953 they went to what they call full pressure lubrication, where you had an oil pump and galleys and lines, and now your oil pressure is 45 psi, so your lubrication is much better. So instead of going to 3,000, 3,200 like the 216, you know those old Chevys from the 40s and early 50s, all right, you can't rev too high. You only got 14 pounds oil pressure, you'll wipe the motor out. But the new 235 cubic inch engine in 1953, which went into the Corvette, had the 45-pound lubrication. Another thing I have over here, this is a hydraulic lifter, all passenger cars with the 216 and then the 245. the 235, they had a hydraulic lifter. Now, a hydraulic lifter has a little plunger pump, and it works on oil pressure to help move the push rod. This is a push rod for a hydraulic lifter Chevrolet 6-cylinder. When the Corvette was developed for 1953, they went to a solid lifter camshaft. Most people don't know that. The Corvette is solid and mechanical valve lifters. This is the push rod for a Corvette. You can still get these. This is heavier, it's shorter, and this is the mechanical valve lifter. It's hollow. This is all it is. It's a hollow piece of metal with a little cup on the top. So you can get a higher rev in the cam. So 1953-54 Corvette, mechanical valve lifter, solid valve lifter. Passenger cars all had hydraulic valve lifters. Wow. So that's a couple of dirty examples just so you can see something. Now, getting on to Frank McGurk, when the 237, in 1937, when the 216 engine came out, that was the year after he failed at Indy, he actually developed many aftermarket components, including multiple carbureted manifolds, same thing with the for intake and exhaust, of course the carburetors, special camshafts, and special head design. The head design will allow frictionless flow, and there's very good engineering in here. When you study what's in this book, you see, and you compare it to the 6-cylinder Corvette, you see where they got a lot of their design from. They actually took Frank McGurk's design and improved, Chevrolet did, and improved on that. So what the original Corvette was a high-performance 6-cylinder engine with the latest power glide transmission, which was the latest technology, with a signal-seeking AM radio, windshield washers, courtesy lights. You had many, many, many options. A brake, emergency brake warning light. You didn't have that in the basic Chevrolet. Jaguars didn't have it, and MGs didn't have it. These were luxury engineered features that were really only on Cadillacs. But the Cadillac had a whole different setup. Cadillac in 1953 had a 12-volt electrical system, and an overhead valve V8, which is where I'm going. Now, back in 1949,
They never sleep. MI6 never sleeps.
back in 1949, a guy by the name of Briggs Cunningham. Now everybody's heard the story about Briggs Cunningham entered 3 1960 Corvettes at Le Mans, and they finished, and or one of them finished, or whatever it was, and Lance Miller has supposedly the one, and this and that, and that's what people know. But Briggs Cunningham started racing at at Le Mans in 1950, and in 1949 he drove from his house in Connecticut to Freeport to meet with 2 guys named Bill Frick and Phil Walters. Frick and Walters had Phil Walters had a nickname he was called Ted Tappet, and they started a business a little before that called Frick Tappet Motors. And in 1949, the big event automotively was the Cadillac overhead valve V8. Now, even though that was an overhead valve V8, it was not engineered like the Chevrolet V8. And I don't remember if it's over square or under square. I have to check. But the Cadillac V8 was the big breakthrough in that year. Many racers grabbed on it. Allard, for instance. They ran Cadillac V8s. And Bill Frick and Ted Tappet built something. They actually went to a Ford dealer and a Studebaker dealer, and they bought new Fords and Studebakers, because in 1949 they restyled the Ford sedan, and they did the same thing with the Studebakers. And there was a dealership right on Sunrise Highway in Freeport. They would buy the Studebakers, pull the engines out, and take crate motors from Cadillac, brand new Cadillac V8s, and put them in. And they were called the Fordalac and the Studalac. And Briggs Cunningham, who was really an old money, very wealthy guy. His father owned General Motors stock starting in 1914, amongst many other companies. His father died. His father became his father when he was about 60 years old. You know, he was having kids all through his adult career. So when Briggs was 7 years old in 1914, his father died, and he inherited a ton of money and stock. And so instead of having to work, he used it for his two passions, sailing on boats and auto racing. In 1944, he founded the Sports Car Club of America. And 5 years later, after the war was over, and he had decided to go racing at Bridgehampton. I keep saying Bridgehampton, Le Mans. He had decided to go into Le Mans in 1950. He took his, he drove down on the Meadowbrook Parkway to Freeport, and he met with Frick and Phil Walters. They built two Cadillacs to race. One was a standard sedan, the other one was modified. The modified one was called Le Monstre, and they hired two engineers from Grumman to do the aerodynamics on it, from Grumman Aerospace. And I know where the car was built, too. The building is still there.
Wow.
Maybe the Chamber of Commerce would like to know.
Wow.
You have a historical site.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Frick and Ted Tappett became his drivers. Even though Briggs Cunningham had a lot of drivers. He had John Fitch, who he drafted. He molded well over a dozen race car drivers in the early 1950s for his trips to Le Mans. He did a lot in France because he also built the Cunningham sports car. Only 36 were sold. He was involved with that, and he was also involved with marketing the early Corvette. He even got two of the 1953 Corvettes. Briggs Cunningham raced until 1967. He also was the first one to develop the white with the blue hash marks. That was not Dodge, it's not Carroll Shelby, it's Briggs Cunningham. But again, in the media, they'll tell you what they want to tell you, and they're not going to tell you the whole story. They were so successful with the Cadillac V8 that Chevrolet engineers, since Briggs Cunningham had the General Motors stock connection, he was a major stockholder in General Motors, they looked at a V8 for Chevrolet, and of course it would be tested in the Corvette as well as the Bel Air. When the Bel Air was restyled in 1955, they wanted the over-square design of a V8 engine. Not only that the six-cylinder cars weren't good, it was cheaper, and you got more horsepower. The engineering in the 1955 Chevrolet V8 265, that paved the way for inexpensive horsepower. You could develop a lot of horsepower, and of course the aftermarket industry flourished right behind as soon as the car came out. There were loads of aftermarket parts, and that really helped Chevrolet. Chevrolet became, in fact, in 1956, I have this statistic, 1 out of every 4 automobiles sold in the United States in 1956, 1 out of every 4 was not a General Motors car, it was a Chevrolet. General Motors had over half of the market in 1956. What did we do to ourselves?
Wow.
Okay. And that's because, not because of protectionism, it's because we had a good product and we didn't have anybody interfering with how we made a great product. And to this day, from that point on, you have the V8, but it can all be tied back to Frick and Walters and Briggs Cunningham and racing. Every year, Briggs went racing, and He always brought interesting things, and he marketed his Cunningham car. In fact, Phil Walters was moved down there in 1954, I think, to build the 53 to build the Cunninghams. I also had found, and this was a big breakthrough, I got the 1950 Nassau County phone book. It's only that thick, and that's, there are no yellow pages. You want to look up a car dealer, it's in the white pages. It's about that thick. And there's a few interesting things in there. The guy that wrote the song In My Merry Oldsmobile, his name is Billy Murray. He lived in Freeport, has his address there. And there's Frick Tappet Motors. And I have the address, so I know where they were located. And I was also told by some racers of Chevrolet six-cylinders back in those years, where Bill Frick lived with his mother in Baldwin. And it's really a Long Island story. This is a Nassau County, Long Island story that the Chevrolet V8 really started in Nassau County.
Wow.
It's pretty cool. And I have all of the proof, and the Cadillac and the Fordillac and the Studillac, and you can't only say that Frick and Tappet were into the Cadillac because Sidney Allard was, and many other people. That was the only engine that really gave you the performance you needed to be competitive in racing. So
That's interesting.
we have here the first Corvette ad, which is on the back of the Watkins Glen 1953 program. Okay. Here is, I did this when we started the Metro lines with the NCRS Long Island Metro chapter. You remember Honey Teich? Honey, she died a couple of years ago.
She did?
Yeah, she had heart disease.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
Yeah, she worked with me as editor on this one when it came out. And so I started, actually, I write a column in the Solid Axle Club magazine. I've been doing it over 20 years. It's called Six Cylinder Corner. And there's a lot of topics in there that you won't read about anywhere else that I've come up with research. And one of them was, who was Frank McGurk? And when I went on Wikipedia, they had nothing except this 1936 Indy entry. I could write a ton of stuff, so I think I'm going to wind up doing that, because I have a lot of information. But there's Frank McGurk in 1936 in his Indy car. And then we have other situations that come up. Popular Mechanics, they did a report on the Corvette. This is the six-cylinder Corvettes. They interviewed about 24 of them and wanted to know what was good and bad, and they said everything's fine except the top leaks. Well, it wasn't designed to be driven in a hurricane. And then here's another Consumer Reports. They compared the new T-Bird with the 1955 V8 Corvette. This is another good book, The Chevrolet Story. This was published in 1960.
Oh, those are great books. Yeah.
Yeah, you can get those. This is another guy that raced, Maury Rose. This is 1953 Corvette number 3. It's a Chevrolet photo outside his home in Michigan. Maury was very instrumental. He was a 3-time Indianapolis 500 winner, and he was hired by Chevrolet for the Corvette and also for the Firebird turbine car, and he worked for Chevrolet for many years on special development after he retired from racing. And I wrote a story on him in my column several years ago, and there's a lot of stuff that I never knew either. And of course, Speed Age, this is on the 1953 Corvette. During the war, General Motors built bombers. They didn't build cars. And this is the Solid Axle Club magazine.
That's Dominic. That's
Yeah,
Dominic.
that's Dominic. Dominic got his car on the cover. He's a member. And in fact, there's I don't know if you saw in the media, there was they opened the Tappan Zee Bridge with a yellow 1955 Corvette. Well, Dominic, myself, and Richie Engelhard were involved with that, and that was an insurance client of mine who agreed to lend us the car. And Richie Engelhard knows the guy who knows Governor Cuomo.
Okay.
and we put it all together and got the car up there. So and when did they do it? Corvette Carlisle weekend.
Oh, Jesus.
Like, you couldn't pick a worse time, you know. But they got it done, and Andrew Cuomo drove the car, and he liked it, and he didn't hurt it. With the other guy that allegedly, this man, when the bridge opened in 1955, he had a 1955 Corvette he bought new. But back then, it was a car. Nobody knew what a Corvette was.
Right.
Now, online, on the opening in 1955, I looked at those pictures, and there is a Corvette 53405 in the traffic, which that could be him. I don't know what color his was, but this is the story, and if that's what they say, then that's it. He's 96 years old now, and so he rode with Governor Cuomo. They did laps back and forth, try out the bridge, make sure it didn't collapse or whatever.
Is that on the internet by any chance?
It was in Newsday in August the 25th. I have a picture of it on my phone.
Sure.
And the car was restored by Dominic, and
Is that his customer's car, Jim?
Jim Newman. Yeah,
That's a nice car.
Yeah, the car was done, and they wanted a real 55, not a replica, not a kit car, they not a tribute or whatever. And they were very fussy. I mean, you know, you figure you're going to fool the government. Well, you're not going to fool the government. They get what they want. But I think owning that car and saying, hey, this car was used to open the Tappan Zee Bridge. Governor Andrew Cuomo drove it and rode with this World War II veteran. I think that's pretty cool. That's part of the fun of the hobby and so forth. Absolutely. And then over here I have a few dash plaques I brought in just so you can look at these. These are from the 70s. Lycoa, Scuderia X. I did the first concours for the Long Island Corvette Owners Association, and
I don't know where he went, but yeah.
Richie and I were involved with it. This is from the second one. In fact, this concours, I should go to Glenn Spielberg, who's got the L88. Dave Dempsey owned
that car.
The L88 then. He drove the car in 1976 from his house in Farmingdale down the Oyster Bay Expressway to Bass Chevrolet, where we had the concours. No plates, no insurance, no registration, no inspection, and an L88, whoa, and he pulls right into the show. And this is the plaque from that show. I gotta show this to Glenn, you might like it.
Yeah, not many people know about the story about that car.
Yeah.
But Dave Dempsey had that, oh my God.
Well, Dave Dempsey, I mean, if he had the right backing, he would have been a professional race car driver. He definitely had the skill, and he definitely had the freedom not to care about breaking things.
Let me ask you a question. Did he know? Because did he know that was the golf car when they actually bought it from him? Because I know Richard Prince bought the car.
Well, Dave I don't think he knew the whole history. He knew when he bought it in 1974, and then he swapped I wrote Richard wrote the story, and I was involved with the car, and then it rolled in Bridgehampton in 1976.
I was going to say, that car rolled a couple of times.
Well, it was hit about 14 times, yeah.
Yeah.
But most race cars, again, they were made for that, because if you don't wreck it, you're not going to win. And I mean, I raced also, whether it's drag racing or circuit racing. I had a 62. And I did Jim Kahana, and I did drag race. I never went on like a Lime Rock or whatever, because you really have to make the investment into a lot of safety things, and I didn't want to hack up my car with it. You know, you have to have a roll bar or something. Especially today, it's even worse. You're better off today with a coupe, but it's fun, but it's also dangerous. And you get a lot of these people that are very competitive. You can get killed. You are badly hurt in a crash at 100 miles an hour. Whether in Lime Rock, I was there, and also Laguna Seca, when they had the vintage races. And of course, Bridgehampton, I worked the flags when Richie and I were in Lycoa in the mid-70s, 1975. And I remember Ralph Gangali, he's in Florida.
I remember Ralph Gangali, yeah. Ralph
also was there. I still remember that, coming back from Bridgehampton on a hot summer day after the flags, and watching a lot of these guys. it takes a lot of skill. When people say race car driving is not a sport, it's not an athletic, no, it's athletics and it's a sport, because you have to have a lot of skills to know how to maneuver that car and what to do. It's not as easy as people make it out to be. It looks a lot easier than it is, and it's very dangerous. And I saw, working the flags, I saw many cars wiped, and this is 1975, 76, these cars wiped out. And when that L88 rolled, because he gave it to his friend, I think it was Warren Seidenspinner, or one of those guys, you know, you could lose control of that. So it's, even though it's fun, Rich, I'm talking about in 1975 with Bridgehampton.
Oh, yeah.
And Dave with the L88, and it rolled, and I think 1976 it rolled. Does anybody have any questions on anything? Nope, everybody is fulfilled.
Alan, what can you say about the body? I heard the first prototype 53 body was made on Long Island?
What happened was the first 30 cars were made by GM Parts Fab. They were made actually in the Chevrolet headquarters in Detroit. I found a lawsuit online, all the data. There was a lawsuit. James Lunn was had a fiberglass laminating business, and he did the technology by the bag molding process. So what he did, he had a friend of his, this other guy, his last name was Wall. They both graduated from West Point in 1926. So he hired this guy Wall to go find auto manufacturers that wanted to have a fiberglass body, like Kaiser Darren was one, Whittle Wildfire was another, and Chevrolet for the Corvette. But the guy never got any orders other than the Corvette, which Jim Lund got anyway, because Chevrolet was really in tight with Morrison of MFG. So they gave MFG the contract and said, we want bag molded parts. Now bag molding is where you have a mandrel and you put the cloth on there, and you spray the resin and suck vacuum out, and the resin adheres to the fiberglass. So MFG didn't make it by that technology. They were coming out with two dies that were pressed together under 30,000 pounds of pressure. That was how they were made in late 1954 or 1955. So they awarded the contract to MFG. MFG says, gee, we can't make this, so they go to Lund Laminate, and Lund Laminate made the parts. So what Lund Laminate did is true. They were made at Lund Laminate in Huntington, and then they also opened an office in Ashtabula, Ohio, which is where MFG was. So they had two plants going, making the body panels for the 1954 and 1955 Corvettes. So they were made, some of the parts were made on Long Island. And then in 1956, the Goodyear bid on the contract to make the bodies, and a lot of those cars were made by Goodyear. In fact, Phil Castaldo has a 1956, and his car was bought new by the guy who worked for, one of the guys who worked for Goodyear to make the cars. Yeah, he was a Goodyear employee. But most of the most industrial manufacturers would bid on those contracts that were in that type of business. And 1956 and 57, Goodyear made some of the body panels, and then in 1958, MFG pretty much had the whole thing captured. See, it's like anything else. I don't call it nepotism. I call it like, when you're in tight with management, you're going to get the job. And MFG, because of the high pressure dies at 30,000 psi, MFG was the one that wound up with the full contract anyway. And it's funny that the engineers specified vacuum bag molding, and then they give the contract to somebody who doesn't do it.
Wow.
But, okay, anybody else?
Alan, what was the interrelationship between Frick and then when Dunpop came on board?
Bill Frick really had nothing to do with Duntov. Duntov was strictly a Chevrolet employee. He came on to the Corvette project in May of '53, after the Motorama season, and he actually worked with Maury Rose to test the car number 4, 5, and 6 were sold to the 4 was sold to Spencer Weed, who started the Grand Union Supermarket Company, and 5 was sold to Crawford Greenwald, who has an incredible story. He was a DuPont engineer. He married into the family. He married Margaret DuPont, one of the daughters of the DuPont family. And he was involved with the Manhattan Project with Dr. Oppenheimer, and a brilliant guy. And he got number 5, and I have a video that was emailed to me of him putting gasoline in it in July of '53.
Oh, that's
They took delivery from Frank Diver Chevrolet, and number 6 was sold to HB DuPont, and I think I have a picture of that car. If I don't, my apologies, maybe I didn't bring it, but I have a picture of that car, and that car is owned by Steve Sokoloff in Philadelphia today. And number 5 was owned by John Kosis, and that was sold a few years ago. Those are the first 3 sold. And then the next one sold, there was number 12 that was sold. A lot of military people bought them because we were just coming out of the war between World War II, Korea. I'm coming out with a story that's coming out on Solid Ground this month, and it's about a guy named Colonel Springs. He, if you ever heard of spring-made sheets, their family made them since the 19th century, and he was a World War I ace, and wrote, in the 1920s he wrote a lot of war stories about the front, World War I, and he got 1953, number 155, which was restored by Chevrolet in 1963 for the 10th anniversary of the Corvette. It was in Corvette News, and then they sold the car to a guy, and he had it judged and all that. So I have a picture of that in there. But a lot of the cars were sold to people that were very interesting people. And even when you get into, but that, I didn't bring anything on that because I was trying to focus on before, like how this stuff came about. You know, anybody? Yeah.
How many 53s would you say are still around?
Well, 300 made. I'd say 350.
all right.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing. I don't want to go near there. The only thing I said, I went to Corvette Carlisle, and they had 8 1967 L88s. And only 20 were made. I said, that's pretty impressive. That you're going to get, for Carlisle, you're going to get 8.
Yeah.
So there was a running joke that there was 8 showed up, the other 35 couldn't make it. I don't know.
Alan, while I have you, I know we spoke at Carlisle a little bit. We speak a lot among ourselves about the hobby and where it's going. And I know you're very involved in it. And some guys are seeing it, maybe 10 years, 15 years. I mean, so... And it's funny because I had a conversation. I was at a trade show with security people, and I was talking to a guy who happened to be a Corvette guy, and we were talking about the same thing. So, I mean, what's your take on it? Because you're involved. I mean, you're still in the insurance world. I mean, what do you see?
Well, I'll tell you where it's going. The hobby is becoming expensive, and it used to be a guy could go out and buy a car for $2-3 grand. Not too long ago, you pick the least desirable Corvette. I mean, pick a 70s coupe with an L48 automatic. That's probably the least expensive car. You can't even find that stuff. Let's put it this way. If you restore it because you got to drive it and it can't break down, where are you? You can't restore anything for $5,000. So when people say those cars are worth $4 grand, I say, good, I'll take one. Fine, we'll bring it here. You can't get it.
I was going to ask you, in that realm, how do you feel about the resto mod craze that's going on?
Well, but people want something different. If somebody took a '57 fuel-injected Corvette there was a Duntov Award winner with the original powertrain, and made a resto mod. I'd say, you couldn't find another one? You know, get a body and a rusted chassis and build something like that. It's the same thing when, you know, I was just talking race cars, we can go talk about street rods. Now, many people today will prize a 32 Ford Coupe or Roadster or whatever, if it's got the original metal body.
Attention patrons, the time is now 8:45. The library is closing in 15 minutes.
It's got the original flathead and so forth.
Thank you.
But most cars weren't found like that. So if you don't have an engine, original powertrain, go find the parts and rebuild something that's rusted out and 30, 40, 50 years old, forget about it. So you get a 350 Chevy V8 and you put it in there. Street rodding was always given a bad name, but all people did was try to take something that's in the junkyard that they didn't have at the time $5,000 to build a Packard V12. So they went and they bought something for $200 or $100, and they got a motor here and they did their own work. And that was the 1950s. When you saw Happy Days, Arthur Fonzarelli, that was a pretty accurate description of what a guy, because I was a kid then, what a guy would do back then for a car. Because even in the 60s, it's not like today, you go to Kennedy High School in Belmore, the kids' parking lot has nicer cars than the teachers' parking lot, because they say, you want the Mercedes or the BMW, you know, you're 17, you know.
Alan,
So,
based on what you're saying, right?
yeah.
Looking in the future, 10,
So
15
my point is that the hobby is going toward people that can afford it. That's it. It's not dying. It's not. It's just there's a lot of people that are not going to spend or can't spend $50,000 on a restoration or $100,000 or whatever it is. And even you go buy a new Corvette, it's $70,000, $80,000, and so. Either way, it's for 2017, 2018 now, you're going to spend $70,000, maybe even 80 or more. So if you're going to spend it on a new one, or you're going to spend it on a 62, you're going to spend it. And if a person chooses not to spend that, they're going to buy something else.
do you see it appreciating or depreciating in the next 10, 15 years?
Well, I see the dollar in the toilet. The politicians don't throw stones at me, politicians. I know Ed Mangano is a club member, but I'm not blaming him. But because of the borrowing and all the leveraging, I mean, the dollar is, we're going to have inflation. We're going to have bad inflation. So if a cup of coffee is $8 and a donut is $4, well, a Corvette's going to be $150,000. It's just the value of the dollar. And you can go back to the 60s and things were a lot cheaper because money was not eroded by its purchasing power, that's all. But there'll be the people who will be in it will be the ones that either choose to spend the money or can afford to. Other people will buy Mustangs or they'll buy Volkswagen Beetles. Even a Volkswagen Beetle will cost you $20,000 a year.
Well, yeah.
The fact that, again, back in our day, because of American cars, the only time you got a European car was the guys came back from World War II, they brought them over.
Well, that was the MGT TC.
Right, so the point I'm getting at is, today, the kids are buying the Japanese cars for $20,000, $30,000, $40,000.
Well,
They're not buying Corvettes, they're buying a cheaper car to go
well,
fast.
first of all, it's what's available. It's a lot easier to take a 2002 Honda Civic and go to a speed shop and buy aftermarket parts and build it, and over a course of a year, instead of saving your money, you're spending a few hundred a week or whatever you have, you'll build the car. And a guy that's working, that's 21 or 19 or whatever, that's going to be it. In 1970, a guy did the same thing with a 55 Chevy. The only thing is, the 55 Chevy is a lot more than in 1970. You could, I got bylines that I saved from 1969. All right, I bought my 62 Corvette in 1969. I have bylines.
Wow.
Those were published in one of these articles. Call the phone number, you never know. Back then, you know, you'd see 19, well, these were later model cars, 1967, 435 horse Corvette, $2,800. I mean, but that was when you made $100 a week. That was pretty good. Today, $100 a week could buy you gas and dinner, you know? So everything is relative to the value of the dollar, which is tanking. So that's my opinion.
Are you seeing any of the guys in their 30s and 40s in the hobby these days?
Sure.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah. But again, a guy that's 30 years old doesn't have $80,000 or $50,000. So they're gonna buy a Honda for $900 and they'll work on it. Look, I just bought a Honda Civic SI, brand new. I haven't even driven it. I drove it home and put it in the garage. I didn't have time to play with it. It's red. The car is 205 horsepower. Out the door, 26 grand. You know, sunroof and options galore. I mean, they wanted to show me everything. I said, look, I got to get this thing home. My chauffeur, my girl, she's in the car there. We got to leave. I'll come back another time. And that was like 3 weeks ago. I was looking for one of those type of cars because that's like an easier car to get into cost-wise. And I got to say, Honda, Toyota, Mazda, they give you a lot for your money. Now, Chevrolet gives you a lot for your money also, but a Corvette is not a $30,000 car anymore. The last time it was a $30,000 car was what, 1985 or something like that? It was even more than that.
Right. That's true. Wow.
That's what I see, but don't fear. There'll always be people that want to be in the hobby. It's just that the demographic will always be changing because it depends on how much money people can afford. I sure love a Mercer J35 Raceabout from 1913, but that's a few $1 million. I'm not spending that on that. If I had it, you know.
How many 53s do you own?
A couple.
I heard more than that.
Well, yeah, I have a few.
Heard the rooms.
But those are cars that need constant maintenance. You know, it's not, I mean, my 1965, for instance, 365 horse, I mean, you're gonna think, boom, you know, I had it up at the show in the Bethpage Credit Union, you know. But there's a lot to be said for 12-volt cars. I mean, I'm still looking for a good 6-volt battery. I mean, I thought I found one with Summit Racing. They have the Optima, which is half of a 12-volt. It's good, but I want something that stays hot for a couple of years, you know, not like it needs charging every few months, you know. And that's hard, and that's why people with Model A's, Packards, and other 6-volt cars, it's just very, very tough maintaining them because, in fact, you're not even going to get a 6-volt electrical parts, whether it be a coil, a battery, wires. You got to go specialty, you know, you go to Electric Limited or whatever. And even then, a lot of these suppliers, if they don't sell enough, they're not making any money, they're not going to manufacture.
Maybe have business.
You know, that's the problem.
Buy spares.
Well, that's it.
You got to look.
That's it. Well, that's what one guy did when they stopped making, I think it was Packards. He bought a couple of cars and he bought all the parts. He says, I'm set. And he said, I'll never drive another car.
It's good for 120 years.
That's right. That's right.
He's covered.
He's covered.
He's covered.
Wow.
Yeah. Anybody else with a
Anybody
question
else?
about anything?
Question?
Okay, well, I thank you very much for.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for
Who
coming
knew?
down.
Right.
Did they give, I just thought of this, they give a bunch of Corvettes out to actors and stuff like that, 53?
The only one that got one was John Wayne, and he didn't get it because he was, he said, I want my horse. No, he got it because he made a lot of military training films during the war. Most people that got the
you should have
early
asked him.
Corvettes were military, a lot of them were
No,
military.
we don't have, we're kind of
people
short on
did
time.
things
I gave you the
for
40 for the dues.
military.
I'll mail you a check for the
They
50.
didn't
I don't have any more money on me.
That's fine, you don't have to
Yeah, I'll
sign
mail
it.
you, I sent you a text.
What bond is in every picture?
Yeah, I'll mail it to you. I have your address on
Whether
the
they-
email you
they
sent me,
rent,
so
right.
other things.
60 Sleepy
I
Inn.
think they just.
All right, I'll send you
their
the, I'll
business
send you a check.
Thank you so much.
And John Wayne got the part, he says, part in the contract, you got
Gonna give you 40 for it.
Yeah, I gotta give you the.
Yeah, they have that, they have
I gotta note.
Well, a lot of people, the car was very cramped for a lot of purchasers. It even is today, a lot of people will not buy or ride in a two-seat
Yeah, I know.
sports car. Whatever it is, MGB, Jaguar, Corvette, whatever, it's just too tight, too cramped.
Yes, I know, we gotta go.
People today, they want something like a Nissan Armada.
All right, guys, well, thank you. Unfortunately, we have to leave.
Well, it's like you crash
Very interesting, this full throttle,
Yeah?
the switch side is caught.
Oh, okay. All right, cool.
Same advertising.
All right, cool. I had,